Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is a nice day today. It is beautiful outside. The colors, the new trees across our building. I'm happy to see that they are maples. How many of you like those red maples? Yep, all of us, all of us do. They look gorgeous, and imagine in a few years how they will be absolutely tree lining Dixon Street in this park. So my name is Ranu Jung. I'm the founding executive director for this Institute for Integrative and Innovative Research. Those of you who are on Zoom, and maybe we haven't seen you before, welcome here. Welcome to people in the room. Maybe some new faces that I'm seeing in the room today. So thrilled to welcome all of you here. And before I introduce the speaker, let me say a little bit about IQBR, although many of you are quite familiar, and hopefully by the end of this semester, I'm going to have to stop saying repeating myself about IQBR over and over again. But as you all know, that we are driven by a purpose, and our mission is to be able to solve wicked problems, and those from the Boston region kind of understand when we say wicked problems. But how do we solve these problems that are not easily solvable and require risk and don't have one simple solution? Is through a convergence approach. And when we talk about convergence, we're talking about convergence of not just research and academic stuff, but also the economic sector, bringing the industry in, bringing the people where we have to deploy their behavior in, the policies in, finding all of these teams to find solutions to these difficult problems. We want to be able to make a societal impact, to deploy those solutions, not just have them thought through and have a thought exercise or even just a prototype exercise. We want to get them deployed. So our bold vision is that we get recognized as the leaders in convergence research for societal impact, and that we are the preeminent partner for other members to help them in their journey to getting solutions for their whatever their problems may be. So 5 words define us: integrative, convergence. We want economic development in the region. Our solutions that are there should be at scale, and that we want societal impact. So before I introduce the speaker, I want to introduce somebody else in the audience, and that is Dawood, Tajish, who I think I'm trying to tie a story together. He is a partner and friend and longtime colleague and longtime, I guess, schoolmate or everything to Professor Mehran Narman. And together they have been doing work on Lumo Imaging. Is the company that's there right here at our institute. We have a smart STTR proposal. This is an example of how there's a problem that has been identified. There's a faculty member there's a company that's there, and together they have been looking and finding out a difficult problem that has to be addressed, and it has to do with dermatological cancer screening. And that is the project that is there.
And there is societal impact already. We have sent a proposal. There are 65 counties in Arkansas out of 75 counties that don't have dermatologists. So we send a proposal out to put 10 machines in rural Arkansas so the people who normally don't see dermatologists can get scanned locally, and then the dermatologist in Little Rock or in Boston can look at the scans.
So thank you, Dawood, for that next step. And so here now comes a third person who is also linked with Dr. Ahmad and Dawood. And he's going to bring us another whole picture of saying, how do you take things from one end to the other? How do you come up with solutions? And maybe in the context of big companies, not just in the context of a smaller company and innovation out, but how do you also bring other aspects of it? And what does it mean to take technologies out? So I want to introduce Kayvan Hedayat, and he is a technology and product development leader. He has extensive hands-on experience and has done mechatronic product launches. He has done technology development. He has done engineering management. He has looked at multidisciplinary, multi-location, global engineering teams. So he brings both management aspect, getting innovation in team management, culture management, and coming up with solutions that have to be deployed. And in particular for our region to think about, he has a lot of experience in medical device development developments, adhering to ISO standards, and also FDA design controls of how do we take things that are regulated to the industry. He is currently the senior director at the new product development at CooperSurgical, which is a world leader in the fertility space, and I think it's almost $1 billion company. We had a fantastic discussion at dinner yesterday night. And he's currently managing multidisciplinary teams that consist of mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, CAD engineers, software and firmware engineers, and is launching complex electromechanical system for CooperSurgical's fertility business and medical device solutions. Before this, he worked in automotive industry, and he worked in consulting. He has multiple published and pending patents, and he has contributed to millions of dollars of revenue during his industry tenure. We could learn a lot from him. He attended Northeastern University in Boston for his undergraduate studies in mechanical engineering and graduate studies in reliability engineering and electrical engineering. And today he's going to talk to us about from concept to compliance, building predictable pathways for development in regulated environment. Welcome. We are not New England, but I think you will see that we have a beautiful fall coming here.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Really happy to be here. This is really nice building, and just here about some research stuff that is going to be very, very amazing stuff that you're going to learn. So again, my name is Kayvan. You can see in the slide. I'm going to use a pointer. Unfortunately, people online may not see it, but my QR code for LinkedIn is here on the page. Feel free to connect with me. Also, my email is here. Those of you in the audience who may be students, we do take interns. Bunch of interns actually, and those intern openings will go on our website around January timeframe. Mostly around engineering, mechanical, electrical, software, test engineering, and we have other areas in the company outside of my group, life sciences and stuff. So feel free to go in and take a look at. Connect with me. If you send your resume, let me know so I can follow up there. So the title of the talk is Technology Commercialization and Product Development in Regulated Industries, Industry Perspective and Lessons Learned. So basically, through the years, I've developed some scar tissues as launching products and learning about how things go right and wrong. And so through this talk, we'll cover some of those. So the agenda is below. First, talk about the context. Context meaning that part of that talk can relate to an institute like IQVAR. Then we'll talk about FDA medical device regulation versus other industries. I think what may not be clear is that people assume safety things like we all fly in airplanes are very similar regulation. They are not. There's actually a very fundamental difference in how these regulations are played out and what it means for people in medical device, the pain it causes for us, and how technology can help to accelerate it. So we'll go over the FDA waterfall process. This is a design control. We'll go through these one by one: user needs, design inputs, design outputs, verification, validation, and design transfer. And at the end, I have a recap. So I'll probably be jumping over many different topics because there are different categories. I will have some actual examples. Again, things gone wrong. All right, so the talk is going to be a little scattered, but take this as food for thought and how can we enable the receiving company to go through this reasonably fast whole process. So let's talk about the context. Technology transfer commercialization, there are challenges in the regulated industries. First and foremost, and this is something that Manu and I had a discussion yesterday, time to revenue matters, and it can actually become a showstopper. I mean, it is obvious to everyone that time to revenue matters. We all hear it. Oh yeah, you got to hurry up, but may not be clear is that the way these things are actually measured and decisions are made. I gave an example last night. Is that I just gave a small story. We used to have a chief financial officer in my previous company who had also had a math degree. And he was telling me how, okay, time to revenue matters, how you got to launch. I said, I've heard it 1,000 times, just give me a break. Then he told me something very insightful that I still remember. And that is the way the financial returns are evaluated is these formulas are called net present value, internal rate of return, or return on invested capital, all these things, but they're all based on compounded rate of interest. These are all exponential equations. Look at those equations, it becomes very apparent that if you're launching a project, let's say in our company, and we're making an investment we develop technology, we go in production, we be in production for let's say 5 years, and we make money on that. It's because of the exponential nature of those equations, it's the very first year or two of the project where the money is made. You could have the best project that makes a lot of money year 4 and 5, but if in the beginning you're not successful, financially speaking, from financial return point of view, that is not a successful project. Right? So that exponential equation, I think, was going to stay with you. So really, time to revenue matters, and they wouldn't stop project. The finance people don't care about technology. It's just a fact of life. And we'll talk some more about some other examples. The next thing is really, really important is predictive development resulting in robust solutions required and often not understood nor practiced. This is true in the industry and elsewhere. And you're going to see some more examples of that. But really what that means is that you really understand your system, you understand your inputs, your outputs, what parameters can you control, what are the variables that you cannot control, how do you create a relationship between your inputs and outputs, so-called transfer function. Then you design your product as robust against those variables before you make your very first prototype. Again, use some example what I mean. FDA does have another level of due diligence compared to other industries that makes it painful for regulatory devices in particular. And then the technology academic institutes often are not fully aware of the due diligence and the level of pain it takes to launch products, and more importantly, what it takes to reduce the time to market. Again, we'll have some examples of that. And I'll touch on the word innovation is used separate from launch execution, and I'm not here to talk about innovation, to lecture about that. But innovation is an overused word, and everybody has their own meaning. Every company has their mission statement that they want to innovate, but we want to examine here what does innovation mean as success in the regulated industry. That we talk about the timelines and the robust development power they tie together. So from that point of view, I believe that differentiation can be achieved on 2 fronts for institutes, let's say like IQ or other places. First and foremost, obviously, you have to have a sound technology that you're trying to deliver. But it has to be truly innovative and it must be robust. And again, we'll talk about robustness in a second. But the second area that institutes and technology developers can differentiate themselves, if they truly understand the steps that we go through the design control and the pains associated with them, and position the technology that you can go through this faster. Remember, time to revenue is king, right? And once you know these pains, and you're going to see some examples, what can we do since the beginning, at the inception of the technology, to really position this, go through this whole thing faster? So this is my favorite definition of innovation, and we'll kind of use this as an example. This is not the only definition. This is the many definition, but innovation is equal to application of creativity that creates sustained value. And every word in that sentence matters, and you will see some examples of things went good or not good, and how does that relate to the timelines and to the regulatory industries. But also notice that the way this is described, innovation is not all about inventions and patents. Innovation can be in any area, right? In my old company, we had a person in our finance team, in accounting group. He was able to look at some accounting data and was able to link it to 2 or 3 manufacturing processes where the yields were coming slightly higher. It was causing a pain financially to the company, but nobody on the quality side was detecting it. Was the rate of the quality issues were so slow, but he was able to catch it. His process was innovative in that sense, and he actually won an innovation award. Nothing to do with engineering or science or anything like that. So let's talk about a little bit about FDA versus other industries. So I chose to compare FDA to automotive and aerospace industries because we all fly to different places. We all drive cars. We know how safe these things are. And FDA also has medical devices all about efficacy and safety. So I'm going to talk about some differences between the 2 industries. First of all, from product classification and risk-based regulation, FDA has a different classification with devices in class 1, class 2, class 3 high-risk devices. And there are different submission pathways. If you have a predicate device, you use a 510K. If you have a class 3 with other predicate device, you would use a pre-market PMA approach. And then there's a de novo approach if you want to get away not doing a PMA and not have a predicate. But in the automotive and aerospace, products are not typically classified. Now you do risk standards are applied and go across things like crashworthiness and emissions, but they're not classified the same way as the blue. And the agencies that monitor these things is NHTSA, National Highway Transportation, and in the case of FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. Then the pre-approval and testing. So med device does require pre-approval, including clinical trials for class 3 devices. In automotive world, the testing is rigorous and in the area of crash tests and flight worthiness, but the pre-market approval is not really needed. They can submit it if they want to. And the manufacturer self-certify, very different than going to FDA. In the area of the quality system regulations, so we have the design control, we have all the FDA requirements, but again, in the world of automotive, it's very, very different, and there are some national and international standards they comply with, but the level of due diligence is at. And then from post-market surveillance point of view, every medical device company must submit any kind of recall, any kind of a device issue in the field has reported, they must submit it to the FDA. That's just mandated by law. Whereas in the automotive or FAA area, it's really voluntary. Now, there are some recalls that are causing deaths and stuff. That's a different story, but they will report us. But for the most part, it's voluntary. So here's the big difference. This is the part that is often not understood. So in automotive and aerospace, standards and certification based, not mandated by law. So the way we design product, the way we do it, let's say we have a design review, testing this, and that are steps of development are company based. They're not mandated by the FDA. Whereas in the case of FDA, your process of development, design control is actually mandated by law, which means I can have the best product in my company as a medical device company. But if we're not following the process the right way, and FDA can come in and do an unannounced audit, hey, Kayvan, show me the design review that you proved all the design outputs meet all design inputs, and dig into it, oh, this design output didn't meet this design input. You actually get a warning letter. You get a warning that you didn't, regardless of how good the product is, regardless of the product is excellent. So the process itself is mandated by law, as opposed to the other industries. They're on their own. They do whatever they want, and but at the end they have to pass all the safety tests and stuff. But the process itself is not mandated in the other industries, but by FDA. What does that mean? So commercialization requires, by the way, this symbol is kind of taken away from this content. Commercialization requires following the FDA process step by step. This adds another level of due diligence, which impacts timelines. Positioning the underlying technology and product design appropriately can reduce time to market, and we'll talk about some examples. So let's talk about the FDA waterfall. So this is the FDA waterfall model. It all starts with user needs. You understand the user needs, then you go to design inputs. This is where you take user needs, come up with some actual engineering specifications about things that can be measured and tested. Then you go to the design process, you create your design outputs. And here's the thing. The difference between verification and validation is often not really understood. The purpose of verification is to make sure all the design output is all the design inputs that were created. Did I design the right device, right? And then when you go to produce your part and you have to find a medical device, you do design validation. This is that now you have to make sure that you actually satisfy the user needs. Did I design the right device, right? Versus did I design the device right? So one is about the testing, the engineering testing of making sure that all the engineering output satisfies all the engineering inputs, and then the other one is about the user needs. And all of these are handled in a trace matrix. So every one of the user needs has an ID. Each user need may translate into a few design inputs and so forth. All the way through, you're going to create this big matrix that shows every one of those lines have to satisfy in a column. So trace matrix. Now, is the software element. You can refer to this a loop in a loop. So as you're going through this design control loop body, you're also supposed to satisfy many products these days have software in it. So the software has its own design control, and the elements of design control of the software should be satisfied inside the main loop of the design. So I'm not going to talk too much about software, but I would say this, that software in complicated electromechanical devices, there's a few issues that always come up, regardless of the project, that cause delays. One is software, The other one is around electromagnetic, EMC testing, and things like that. So in the world of software, the reason I mention it here is that from a timeline point of view, FDA regulations are evolving, especially around cybersecurity. Past 3 years or so, regulations have gone to another level where any device that has a software. I'll give you an example. We had a device where the device had a software. It was not connected to the cloud. No way you can connect that device to the cloud. Has software running, it has a user interface, and you can update the software with a USB. Go into the USB and collect data. The USB port itself is covered with a panel with a tamper-proof screws, right? You would think this is not a cyber device, but no. FDA reviewed it. This is actually, if you can get to any port on the device to access the software, no matter what, to the USB, to the PCB, is a cyber device. And now what that means is that you got to go to the certifications, and there's a lot of what's called threat modeling that you got to do, and then penetration testing to really prove on many levels that this is a safe device. It's just very, very onerous process to go through. And so the software process is, I just want to mention it, is a very, very important part of the development. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I just want to mention some challenges. The other one is requirements management. I talk about user needs, design inputs and stuff. Those of you who are involved with software requirements can be, every software requirement document can be hundreds of thousands of lines of requirements, right? How would you go and deal with that? How would you establish bi-directional traceability of these requirements, right? That's why some companies use software like IBM Doors and things like that. It becomes very, very onerous and painful in some cases. So why did FDA come up with design control? We talked about how they mandated process. Why did they do that? So the history is that back in 1980s, I guess from 1989 to 1983 to 1989, they did a study and found that 44% of the voluntary recalls were due to not having adequate design controls. That was one study. And some examples that they found was that there was faulty heart valves and pacemakers causing patient deaths. There were radiation therapy overdoses, again, due to poor design. So that was the foundation of what they did. And they also found that the most frequent cause of the recalls related to design software, non-conforming materials and components. That was the foundation of why they came up with this whole mandated process itself, not the product, as well as the product, I should say. By the way, FDA has significant amount of resources. If you want to learn about design control, this first link is a class that they have, and the CDRH has significant resources. If you want to learn about this, there's a ton of data information about it. So let's jump to user needs. Now we are in the first step of the design control from FDA's point of view. So FDA human factors and usability guidance emphasizes that user needs must include the ability to operate the device safely and effectively, considering potential use of error. I would say that user needs is both an art and a science, and you will see what I mean by that. To get the proper user need and get the right insights, really, really important. How we do that to make or break the innovation process. User needs is about the insight and not specification. So one example I can give is that this is actually from a colleague of mine about the dialysis machine, an in-home dialysis machine that had a specification of the weight to be 20 pounds or lighter, right? They talk to the users and stuff, and they thought it need to be light, we can handle it at home and stuff. But then they did some deeper interviews and they tried to get insight to really why 20 pounds, why. And it turns out that this is not the weight itself was not really the problem. The patient's fear of complex setup and contamination was really the risk, not so much the weight. So the solution was to come up with this color-coded connector, so you cannot put the wrong connector in the wrong place. Very detailed in user interface training, and also a two-way system that can decontaminate itself, right? And that really solved the problem. Now imagine if the company would have designed a product with only 20 pounds in mind, didn't really understand the true user need, and they would launch that product, it wouldn't really be successful if they didn't really understand. So the solution, the user need as the interview is conducted should also be non-solution specific and non-ambiguous. and sometimes it's hard to get. It should be expressed in the words of the users and the stakeholders. It can define relative position to competitive products. For example, you could say the imaging system should be as good as ABC brand and model XYZ. Because it's a user need, it's not a specification yet, it's okay to say that. When you go to the design inputs, then you can specify the resolution, the pixels, this and that. But in this state, user needs can be in that form. So user needs are gathered through qualitative methods, such as focus groups, contextual inquiries, customer journey mapping, and then qualitative methods such as conjoint analysis, surveys, web analytics, and some emerging social media and kind of AI tools. I would say that just in case you're not familiar with some of this stuff, the contextual inquiry means that you observe users in their actual environment. You go and observe an operation, a medical operation. You don't say, you just deeply observing, and then you have separate interviews to really, really understand what they're going through. Customer journey mapping is that you visualize the entire process and you put in the pain points in kind of in that visual map, and how do you do that. And conjoint analysis is if you have a product that has multiple features, how do you assess what feature is more important compared to other features to a user. So these are just some techniques that are used. So some examples I can give, like in the world of, our company, CooperSurgical, we are in fertility, we are world leader in fertility, so we do the IVF labs a lot. So, in the world of IVF, when you have embryos that you're trying to keep alive and nurture them and, to take them the next step, you have to have them at the right temperature. You have to have the media, the protein liquid at the right pH level, so you have the right gases and stuff. So the focus of a design team has been to have the precise temperature, plus or minus 0.1 degree, stability and the right gases, the pH levels and stuff. What was missed was that, okay, you do that, you set up the system and the initial calibration can take a while. That's okay when you first set up a system. But then after that, when the embryologist walks in the lab and in the morning, he or she will look at the temperature readings, for example, and see something is off by half a degree, he or she should be able to recalibrate it to get back to the right thing. Now, it turns out that the calibration was taking 45 minutes. What was missed is that productivity in these labs is really, really important. They're not going to, 45 minutes is way too much time out of the 8-hour or 10-hour day for them to spend on calibration. So understanding that it's not just the temperature and the gas, but the calibration time itself has to be short. So we have to go back and do stuff to bring it down to a much lower numbers, right? These are, again, things that may not be obvious when you first look at the user list. The other one is that in the case of IVF equipment, some of these equipments are fairly large. You have equipment that's like 6 feet wide, because you can have two embryologists sitting side by side looking on a microscope. There's heated places, all kinds of stuff. There's short-term incubators and stuff. But when you have these machines and they have legs, adjustable legs, they have large HEPA filters for clean air, fans, lights, etc. So you sell it to your customer and the device works well, everything's good. But now you're selling it. Now you ship a device to your customer. We had a case in New York City. So some of these chains of IVF clinics have places in New York City, and some of them are in let's say, a third floor on a brick building. You simply cannot take this equipment through the door and through the elevators. So what the service team do, they take it apart, right? Disassembly, damaging things, they go back in and attempt to put it back together. So designing this in a way that can easily go through these things is very important. Now, you can solve this in different ways, and we have our own way. But imagine that you cannot sell to a particular New York clinic, and that clinic is part of a wider chain, and they want to standardize. You may lose out on an entire account because you just miss this little, seemingly obvious but can be easily missed kind of a user. So here's another example. This is back from my automotive days, where I think you see a lot of agricultural tractors. A lot of these have an ignition switch that sits in the open air, and this sees rain and snow, and there's a reasonably high failure rate around these switches. And the farmers, every few years, they go and change them. And so our company came up with a very good idea to come up with a robust solution with an electronic key that you go in there and you turn the switch. We kept the same form factor, right? We didn't change the circuits, even though we managed to use the powers and the grounds and stuff the way they were. And came up with a solution that was really nice. And from a user needs point of view, we talked to the engineering groups, the two different large agricultural companies. And the engineering teams, both of them said, this is a really good idea, it solved a problem. We did it, right? We launched the product and here we were, and it just ended up to in a very niche, low volume application. And the reason was that we didn't talk to the decision makers. The engineering group, of course, they said, like, yeah, solve the problem, and as long as the price is not too much, you have to put it. But it turns out that when you talk to the decision makers, in particular the management team and the purchasing team, they say, hey, listen, we have a service team. We make revenue out of a service. We can't just let that go. And by the way, there are some other new generation products in the pipeline. So anyway, that product really didn't go anywhere. So what does that mean? Again, going back to so we see the green check marks. Was this a good idea? Was the fundamental technology behind it was really good? Was this a good idea? Yes. You see the other green mark. But then, was it truly innovative? No, because innovation should be application of creativity. It was creative solutions, but it didn't add value. And it wasn't sustained because we launched it in a very niche application, but from a financial return point of view, that's not good enough. Again, from financial, the word value in the equation of the innovation means that you have to solve a problem, but it has to have value for whole project, including the financial aspect. So it's an example of how things didn't go well in the work. The technology itself, the application was all great, but the rest of it didn't really. So user needs should be validated. Like in our case, we should have validated our user needs with decision makers and others. We didn't validate. User needs must be validated with relevant stakeholders. Partial return on investment is not value. So the next topic in the user needs, we talked about using these techniques, quantitative and quantitative techniques to capture. Is that enough to do that? The answer is no. There are other needs you have to identify upfront, and world-class companies go above and beyond to really identify other things that would affect your design. We talk about user needs, competitive benchmark, and predicate devices. Anyone in the product development or technology development should have their computing devices in their lab, take it apart, run it, test it, do a cost analysis to really understand your but that could result into requirements in your design, your development. You got to understand field returns and warranty. Things fail in the field, right? And what do you learn from that? And in a minute, I'll talk about FDA has a database called MOD database, and you go in there and find all kinds of data about device failures and why they fail, and learn from it. That would again create requirements for you to make your design. Lessons learned from previous developments. Every company like ours have launched other projects either very similar or somewhat similar, and we have lessons learned. But unfortunately, what happens? The product is launched, let's say, a few years earlier. The lessons learned are even captured, but then they go end up sit in some directory somewhere, and nobody even remembers where they are. And a new team is in place. A few years later, it just gets lost, and you don't benefit from that. So you have to really consciously look for these things. Service requirements is another one. All these devices have to be serviced. You got to make sure they can be serviced appropriately. What can we do with the technology, product development features, so we can make sure we can service it appropriately? There are COGS, cost of goods sold. This is really important because the financial return obviously is time-based, but also from a cost and price. Every product has a cost to build it, and then you sell it at a certain price. You have profits. And what happens is that in the beginning of the project, the cost is estimated and everything looks good. And then as the design goes forward, there's scope creep. Engineers come in and make an improvement here and there. But before you know it, the cost gone way above, and I think it's unprofitable. Now you got to now hustle and come back and lose time to bring it back. There are compliance needs. We'll give an example of that. You got to be careful about raw materials and industry standards. You need to leverage your suppliers and partners because if you have a key technology that requires a specific process or technology from a few suppliers, they need to be in the loop from the beginning, but they could impact your requirements and designs. And obviously, IP means intellectual property. You got to make sure you're not infringing on anybody's patent. So I'll give you an example on the compliance that kind of bite us. We had a device that we went through the design. So we had this device. We've gone through the user needs, design inputs, outputs. Everything was done. Everything was ready to go. We went to the validation portion. Now we looked at the compliance. And there is a line item that says all the materials you use should be REACH, RoHS, and California Prop 65 compliance. What does that mean? So REACH and RoHS are about hazardous materials, and RoHS is more about electronics, PCBs and stuff, and REACH is more broader. And California Prop 65 is about drinking water. You may probably hear about this forever plastics, forever chemicals and stuff in drinking water. So even though it's not a regulation to say that your device is included, but you should have, if it does, if you know it has that, then you have to have a kind of a warning around that. So now that we have this device, probably had 200 components in it, and nobody had looked at that compliance on top of it. We assumed when we go to our suppliers, material suppliers, there's PCBs and steel, lubrication, rubber, they all have this certification of medical device companies, right? But no, 40% of them had mostly around PCB. The rest of them, it wasn't, they said, you know what, we rely on you guys to develop that kind of thing. So what did that mean? We had to go to another company, take a device apart, do testing, like, like FTIR testing for organic material and EDX for non-organic material, prove that we are REACH and RoHS certified. And we lost it for 3 months, right? Maybe more even. So looking at these upfront really matter. The other example is IP evolution. So we had a brushless motor development that in the beginning we looked at the IP or patent. Every company has a patent law, either internally or externally. Everything was clear, but then we neglected to monitor additional patents. And 2 years later, a new patent has come about and that caused us to go and make changes because we just didn't properly. So the point is that you got to look at the holistic set of needs and make sure you stay on top of them as you're developing your user needs and make sure you really understand it. So user needs by itself is not enough to ensure success. Work as organizations, have a holistic approach to this, and from the onset of the project. And I did mention the FDA mod database for predicate product problem. You can go in there, you can search by device, you can search by like submission path, 510K or PMA, search by year. Very, very powerful and will show you the issues. Now, it doesn't tell you the whole story, the root cause of the failure, but at least it will give you some hints that you can go do additional research to figure out what's happening. So that takes me to, in order to talk about having properly with insight, developing user needs. Let me give you an example of going back to the automotive days. Some of you may know that back in 1960s and 70s, products from Japan were not good quality. The cars are rusting, nobody was buying them. Toys, everything was coming from Japan, but had a really, really bad reputation. Fast forward to 80s, 90s, up to now, Japan is world-class. The vehicles, Lexus, for example, is truly world-class and competes with US and Germany and success. So how do they solve that, right? First, they had to solve the quality problems. They partnered with some quality gurus, actually from US, actually going endemic, but put it aside. Once they solved the quality problems, but the question was, okay, now products are good enough, but how do you now get more market share? This is where they focus on what we call user need or customer satisfaction. So what you see here is what's called the Kano model. So the Kano model is, like, I want to go over this, is important for insight. The x-axis is the degree of satisfaction on any product or service. You're either fully achieved or not fulfilled, right? The y-axis is the satisfaction, customer satisfaction. Actually, you're either very satisfied or not satisfied. For the first one, the red line, the linear line, is called the spoken or one-dimensional quality. You specify something, you expect to get it, and you get it, and you're satisfied. You specify buy a car, you specify a certain gas mileage, and you get it, and you're satisfied. So it linearly goes up and down. If you don't get that thing that you specified, you become dissatisfied. You go on the negative side. The other one is the gray line. This is the expected quality or must be. So if you buy a car, you expect the window to work. If it works, your satisfaction, the achievement it doesn't change. Your satisfaction doesn't go up or down. It's just because you already expected it. But if something doesn't work, the window doesn't work, you're exponentially dissatisfied, right? But the most important part of this graph is this yellow line, right? The yellow line is what's called the exciting quality or delighters. These are the stuff that when you truly understand your user need insights, allows you to really delight your users. And there's a lot of techniques around that, how they use it. There's a bunch of books about Toyota product development. If you're interested, go read it. There's so much interesting stuff in there. And one of my favorite images is this, they call the Oldman principle, where it shows that you're trying to get to the golden nugget. The golden nugget is that delighter, the thing that you want to get inside. Remember the dialysis example I gave? It wasn't about the weight, it was about other things, right? How do you get to the golden nugget? And how do you really probe deep? How do you properly interview, active listening? There are all kinds of techniques that truly can make or break your duration. So go to the user, eyeball to eyeball interviews. None of this remote stuff, they're good, but eyeball to eyeball interviews. Gather insight, practice Gemba. Gemba is a Japanese term. It means where the action is or something like that. So it's used often in that industry. All right, so we're done with the user needs. Let's say you gather all the user needs. You have truly got the insight. Now we're about to create our design. These are now more specific things. So FDA again defines design inputs as each manufacturer shall establish and maintain procedures to ensure that design requirements related to the device are appropriate and meet the intended use and the user needs and the patient itself. So DI sets the design inputs. DI sets the stage for the design. This is now where the design begins to form. Up until now, you don't even know what your design can be, but here now you begin to actually set the stage for what the design is, right? Design inputs are technical breakdown of the user needs, which must be verifiable and testable. Some examples of good design inputs is that a pump must deliver 1 to 100 milliliter per hour, plus or minus 5% accuracy. You can test it. You can, good design input. Or software must comply with IEC 62304 safety class B. That's a very good design input because that class B has all kinds of very detailed requirements that you have to follow. So the design inputs establish technical performance for targets, but also what's very important is that it should be solution agnostic. It should be non-solution specific. I'll give you an example. This is that happened to us. Because when you want to gather user needs, you go to your doctors, surgeons, you go to lab directors. So our marketing team had an interview with this surgeon who happened to have an electrical engineering degree, right? And this was about a device that the device would, I can't talk about some of the details, but you create different levels of force to hold things during a surgical operation. And the force levels, let's say, were at 10 levels or 8 levels, right? And those levels, there was an LED light that would indicate, you look at the LED lights 1 through 8, you can see where you are, roughly where you are, because, the exact numbers don't really matter as much, no. So our marketing was talking to the surgeon, and the surgeon said, you know what, you're paying for the cost of this analog board. Why don't you just put a very small microcontroller, and they're cheap, $2 microcontroller, and put a display there or an LCD instead of that, LED. It just looks nicer. And before we knew it, this became a requirement. It became a requirement and stuff. But putting that in, although it sounds okay and it's not a cost issue, but you go from an analog circuit to even a smart microcontroller. What that means is that now you have a software. Now you have a cyber device in your hand. Okay. That means now you got to go to its whole cybersecurity thing, the threat modeling, penetration testing. You pretty much lose a good 6 months or 9 months, right? So sometimes it's better to stay on an analog, on a simple, it's not possible everywhere, to have an analog solution without any software. Yeah, it may not look as nice, but it's good enough you proceed because timeline is really, really good. Next one. Also, when you have design inputs from a FDA's point of view, you can't just say, this is my requirement and put it in your traceability. You should have a source for that. Where did that come from? Right? They come from user needs, they come from feasibility study, they come from some standard, and you got to actually document what that means. UFMEA, which is user failure model effect analysis, is another source for some of these sources. An example is that if you have a device like a workstation and you have airflow coming down, and that airflow has a certain tolerance, where did that tolerance come from? You have to actually specify. There's some standards around biological safety cabinet standard that tell you what these airflows should be. So actually should document where that come from, right? Not leave it. If you don't have it, then again you get audited, you could run into problems, So make sure that you go. And again, if you do this since the beginning, that would be very, very helpful. So must consider usability and safety. Safety is very important. There's a study that John Hopkins did research by folks over there, Mark McKay and Mike Daniel, and they show that this is actually amazing that the third leading cause in the US is really called medical error. Medical error is not just medical device, but physicians make error with wrong medications and that. But in there are examples of the wrong use of medical devices, wrong setting on a ventilator, or the infusion pump, being confusing and stuff. So having the right design input really matters to make sure that. And that whole research that they did and that statistics can also be an opportunity. How do we design our devices in a way that is foolproof? Nothing can go wrong with them like that. So takeaway translation of a user needs to design inputs can significantly impact design. Make sure DIs, design inputs are solution agnostics. Consider the usability and safety aspects. Validate DIs, document the DI sources. All right, now we go into the design of. Now we are designing a product. Now we're ready to make our prototypes and stuff, right? So this is really the result of all the design effort that we have gone through from the user need, user inputs. And now we are trying to finish our design and create the documentations for that. I will spend a little more time on this section of design output because this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where we have actual devices and testing. So you see some examples. So this is a little bit of time on this section. But what are some of the examples of design outputs? Could be engineering drawings and schematics. Could be manufacturing instructions. Could be software code, including source code and documentation. Quality measurements. The DMR, device master record, is required by FDA. And the meaning of DMR is that you should be able to hand off the DMR to another company who knows nothing about this device and should be able to use that and actually produce a device. Buy everything, assemble it, test it, and understand. So DMR is another example of a design output. So a good example of the design output for a portable instrument, the design input may say that the handle must accommodate hands of 10% female to 90% male. And design output can simply be a drawing that has all those dimensions, and some of the drawing number is given as documented in your database. So now we will talk about robust and predictable design outputs that are required to ensure successful verification and validation and commercial success. So this is a really important topic from an engineering point of view and from a successful device point of view. And this is where the base technology can set the stage where whether it's going to be successful or not. So first thing to keep in mind that variation is inevitable and failure is optional. Everything we do, every one of us, whether it's fundamental research, whether it's product development, whether it's software development, we all face variation, right? We really understand the variation. How do we go about understanding variation and make our product robust against the variation that we cannot control and use the things we can control to really make our design robust? I'm going to give you some examples, right? A robust technology and design transforms uncertainty into reliability by accounting for variability in input processes and execution. So easy to say, how do we achieve a robust design, right? There are different techniques out there. I'll just talk about two of them. Not saying what's right or wrong, but these are the two that I've seen be very, very successful. One is a tool that's used often, but how you use it and how effective you are matters. It's called FMEA, Failure Mode and Effect Analysis, and I'll show you what that is. The other one, more important one, is using a probabilistic methodology where you can actually predict in percentages or parts per million performance of your device once it's launched before you make a prototype. And we'll see what that means. So here's a picture of a typical FMEA. Again, failure mode and effect analysis. So what you do for your device, you get a cross-functional team. It has to be cross-functional, not just the engineering, or regulatory, quality, other marketing, others. And you say, okay, based on this device design, this is a particular failure mode that can happen. This is the effect of this failure mode. And then the severity of this failure mode is defined. The tables are given that whether it's critical that can result in death or it's negligible that there's inconvenience. Severity, and you rank it all, you got to rank by number, right? You put a number in your FMEA, that particular line item. And then the occurrence, what's the probability of occurrence? How likely is this to happen? Is it frequent or is it improbable? And again, you rate it. And then the important part is detection. What do you have in your design, in your process that will detect this particular failure? If you have good detection, you get a low number. If you have bad detection, you get a higher number. Then what you do, you multiply these three, the the severity, occurrence, detection by each other, now you get a ranking. So if you have a situation with a severe situation that can happen often and you don't have good detection, it stands out, right? Now imagine you have a device that has only 50 or 100 parts in it. That FMEA can be 100 pages long, 200, I mean, it's many line items. So how do you prioritize your effort? You go by those RPN numbers. You multiply this thing, and the highest ones are shown in the beginning, and you kind of work at them at a time. So that's one tool that's used very effectively if it is properly used. But the one that's more, in my view, probably one of the best tools out there, it's called the P diagram or parameter diagram. Is that again, you got to put a diagram for your system. And I'll give some examples here. So every system and a product has some inputs, right? And has some outputs. So have some input. So some examples here. Example called stem cells can be your input into your system, your cell therapy. You have a target surface temperature, would be your heated surface, system. RFID tags, they reach, meaning sometimes RFID tags, they're not only on the surface, they have to be reached up at temperatures and want to detect them. So this is your system and this is your response, your output. Right? These are your desired outputs that you have. You want to have a potency and purity on your cell therapy. You want to make sure that your RFID and temperature gradients work. And then you have some error states. But the key thing is that, okay, now you understand it. But now the question is that what parameters, control factors is at your disposal, knobs you can turn to make the product robust. Robust against what? Against factors that you cannot control. So for example, if I take the temperature as an example, there are things I cannot control. There are tolerances of components, there's environmental use, there's duty cycle, there's all kinds of stuff I cannot control, but I have to be robust against, right? And if you get truly, and the way to do that is you got to create a relationship and understand the relationship between your input and output. That's called the transfer function. Create a transfer function, then you run, and I'll show you some examples what that means. Once you do that, and you actually truly do this before you make your prototypes, and then you validate, that's truly robust kind of a development approach. But so key is to understand the relationship between input and output, sensitivity of control parameters, and make system robust against noise variables. Right. So let's go through an example to see what that means. Okay. This is a case study. This is an example of a magnetic position sensor being designed for a surgical instrument, but it's really unique in the sense that it had to sense the position of a rail, but the rail was not tightly. The dimensions can go in and out and left to right, so the air gaps between the sensor and the magnetic source was varying a lot. Also, the sensor was being exposed to temperature, actually very high temperature. So the question is that how do we make sure the sensor will operate across these variables that cannot control mechanical tolerances, material variations, and environmental conditions? How do we predict the failure rate in manufacturing? So the first thing that the design team did, and this is the diagram of the showing the input and outputs on this particular system, showing the rate detection as an output, and then the inputs are those things that we have to deal with. So what did the team do? They created a prototype, right? And they tested at the extreme points of design space. Like it was an air gap variation, the extreme case, and tested it was successful. The extreme temperature, tested it was successful. Took the magnet geometry and changed it to an extreme condition. They did all the testing and it was all successful, except when we released the product, failures began to show up, right? So the question is, what happened here, right? What happened was that there was interaction between sensor output gain and magnetic field source. So when you test things in one condition at a time, you're going to miss some interaction. And it was not possible to do the whole thing. So when the design team tested that, they missed interactions between the geometries and the magnetic field source, and the sensor output gains electronic thing being affected by temperature. These things were missed, and had issues. So now we went to the second round of this, and this time the team did it the right way, right? So what we did, we used there's a simulation tool called ANSYS, the multi-physics tool. Like a lot of you will be familiar with that. We use a simulation tool to really model the system. We move back to the inputs and outputs of the robust design. We model the system, understanding relationships, and try to follow up and design accordingly. So here's an actual picture of it. The sensor itself, the geometry still doesn't matter, the magnet, the sensor source, the tolerance, and temperature, all modeled inside the ANSYS. What we did inside the simulator, we ran a DOE, design of experiments, right? So I think everybody knows what design of experiments is, but now I think that created regression. Oh, God. 5 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna have to rush. 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
I gave you 10 minutes 5 minutes ago, so it's 5 minutes.
Sorry. It's only 33 slides. I'm gonna kind of rush through this. We did a simulation inside the design of experiment inside the simulation. That means we can create a regression and understand the relationships. And you can do DOEs inside simulation, but it's very fast because it's not the actual physical testing. Create a transfer function, and the things to note that if you understand the relationship between input and output, and looking at my input at x1, but the variation in my output is pretty large. But if I put my input in an area where the transfer function is shallower, I get a much tighter variation. This is the power of understanding that transfer function in your relationship, right? And at the end, we did a Monte Carlo simulation that everything went well and the design was well received. So the robust design practices will ensure product development success across variables and complex. So I'm going to skip this. This is another example in the automotive world about using a multi-physics tool. In this case, the experiment didn't go well. The simulation failed actually on us after we thought it was working well. We ended up doing a actual empirical regression with an actual vehicle that worked. But so you got to be careful about simulation tools, even though they can be very powerful. This is a recent study about electronic Ethernet board. We did some simulation, and I'm not getting into the details of that. What we did, but here's the takeaway. Simulation tools are excellent enablers to achieve robust design. However, no matter, this is my favorite quote, no matter how elegant or sophisticated a model may be, it must be validated against actual test results. Without this validation, the model remains a hypothesis, useful perhaps, but not trustworthy for decision. The previous example on the diesel was an example of how things went wrong. We trusted the simulation that wasn't really true. So I'm going to skip this as a kind of a case where we missed on a technology. We had a technology we thought was very, very robust, and we actually launched. We had a good launch with that. But what happened? We failed to monitor the competing technology was coming on, called the Hall effect, and was much lower cost. And we were enamored with our own technology, right? And at the end, the results, even though going back to the innovation equation, good idea was good, the innovation itself was good, the execution was good, but again, this was not good innovation because, again, we ended up in a niche application and we lost out on the high value applications. So always competing, evolving technologies is very important. Do not be enamored with your own technology. Be open to pivot if appropriate. The value must be sustained. The verification has to do around testing, and so some of these we already covered. So I'm going to go through these. I'm just going to go to the validation slides. So one example is that if you can find ways to save time in validation is important. Like in the case of med devices, you have choices to do clinical studies, like in our case, or cadaver studies, or use silicone rubbers. We found another case in one of our devices. It's a company in Boston that makes these tissue models from farm animals that can actually become very, very realistic and it help us to save time without using cadavers. So another possibility is that. This is kind of talking about formative studies and summative studies, and you can read this on online. Again, sorry, but I didn't think that takes long. But then you go to the design transfer, you transfer to manufacturing, and the stuff that you have to do. But I want to get to the recap. This is the last slides here. So FDA regulations can be challenging and time-consuming. I think you saw all the steps that we have to go through. Timeline is king. We talked about that, how timeline is important from a financial return. You do robust development, you're really reducing time. So you're doing the design right to begin, doing it right the first time, but also it's going to be profitable when you truly do it back to robust technologies. Envision the entire process and levels of readiness improve timeline. So if you're developing technology, envision the whole thing in front of you. You can't, in an institute like IQR, you probably cannot, execute on all of these, but as much as you can get the technology ready, so for the receiving party can go through this faster, it will be very, very helpful. And again, true innovation goes hand in hand with robust development and minimizing timelines, regulatory environments. Remember, it all comes down to timeline. The application of creativity that creates sustained value. Value is has to be timeline. We talked about the financial return has to be timeline. Robust technology has to be doing the right first time. So timeline should be focused. I have one more slide, but before that, I would say that when I first learned about IQR, went online and learned about this institute, multidisciplinary teams, multi-sector under one roof, it reminded me. You guys all know who Edison is, a great inventor, but some of you may not know that he had a place called Invention Factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. He had a building, and in there he had electricians, he had mechanics, he had scientists on the mechanical electrical side, he had carpenters, he had machinists. They're all together working under one roof, and a lot of innovation came out of that. One thing he had a sense of urgency and timeline. He had mandated every 6 months a major invention, and every a few weeks or so a minor improvement, right? That urgency and working around the clock and the multidisciplinary, multi-sector kind of enable them. So I saw possibility, that's why I wanted to mention that as again, emphasizing on a timeline. One last slide, I debated whether I should put that slide in here or not. This is a little bit corny, but it's also a little playful, but in the spirit of Halloween, I'm here on IQR. Here we are. I have a solution to wicked problems through convergence research. Don't be scared to leverage your multidisciplinary, multi-sector teams to validate your innovation, develop viciously robust technologies, and go above and beyond to run fast markets. Sorry.
Thank you. It's, I think, brought home very much looking at not everything we might take to the FDA pathway, but that rigor that and early thinking of the what is to come to be deployed at the end, how that can actually make the process faster.
Yes.
And I think we have a very different thing that some of the people have been doing, something called the X matrix in their thinking of how they are going to manage their projects. But in a way, to me, I was thinking about it that it's almost like, yes, this is what we want to deploy, but spending that time up front to look at every little detail that is going to be needed would be great. Open the questions.
I'll start. So I've looked at CooperSurgical and all the products you offer, and it's quite an extensive list. I'm curious about what percentage of those products were developed internally versus acquired through purchase of, say, another company.
That's a really good question, because if you look at the history of CooperSurgical, it's a company of acquisitions. Right? So for years and years, they really grow really fast with acquisitions. And then there was a conscious effort made to make this a product development company. So about 5 years ago, that's why I'm there. One of the reasons I joined the company probably about 4.5 years ago. Since then, we have been doing a lot of organic development. Now, organic development goes back even to years before that, but much of the growth has been through acquisitions. In the world of fertility and med device, we have launched and launching a bunch of new products as we speak, organically grow. But historically, though, large portion has been through acquisitions.
A related question, how would universities who have technologies get in touch with it?
So we do that on two fronts. We have a group of mergers and acquisitions. They buy companies that are already revenue generating. But then we also have an innovation group. Actually, that's inside R&D. And there's a small group that assesses new technologies, new findings, and then they would decide is it worth to go to the next level. So the first step is to contact me. I can go to the innovation director and start there. We do have an innovation process before we get into the design control that assesses the technology based on the strategy the company has, and etc. That they have their own criteria, but that would be the place to start the innovation.
Second question, when you mentioned COGS, cost of goods sold, do you have rules of thumb that you use inside the company? Like when you're designing a system and you're buying things quantity one, which is not the cost of when you are finished with the design and you're making enough of. Do you have rules at the time, at early stage? What is the relationship between cost of goods quantity one and
Yes, yeah.
product cost?
A lot of it comes with experience. People who have designed products and launched products for the years, they already know that develop this, and they can look at the part that's molded or machined, so they can tell you a very good estimate. There's also, we have quite a few partners and suppliers, and they team up with us very early on. And in a matter of half a day, I can get an estimate from one of our partners about this quantity of 1% quantity of 200,000, for example. And then there are some software based costing available as well that give you some idea. But the best thing to do is really leverage your own experience and leverage your partners and suppliers. We already have a relationship with companies like us, many suppliers and partners throughout the globe, essentially. And you just partner with them, and you should be concurrent with them to begin with. A true product development requires concurrency with your internal team, your partners and suppliers, and your customers. And you, at the beginning, you're really supposed to do this together. And you're there with you, then you can just simply ask them.
Couple of questions. One about the simulation, the use of models, mathematical models that you described. The FDA is moving to be much more open to using data from models in their review of submissions and has the company had good experiences with that, or have you done that yet, where you submit something to the FDA that is primarily based on modeling data?
We have read papers about this, but practically we have not seen it, nor do we practice, because when you're developing a product, there is a group of design quality that works with us, and they are the ones who make sure we follow. But the R&D team, like me and my team, we want to do things fast, and we may appear to be shortcutting something, but this team is there to make sure that we don't shortcut anything. I have not seen anywhere that we could use models. You always have to validate it has some actual data, at least there's something I'm aware of.
The other was about, you made the comment about lessons learned, or sort of, cumulative knowledge or collective knowledge of the institution. And I was wondering if there are things that the company does. I know, I certainly have experienced it, and I think we've experienced it as a larger group, where, in a university lab, you have students that work on things and then they graduate, and you have other students that pick it up. And sometimes that knowledge gets transferred, and other times it gets lost. And we were like, wait a minute, why aren't we doing that step in the process that we've been doing for 10 years, and that gets lost? Are there things that the company does to try to sort of build that knowledge base and keep it relevant, and keep it useful, keep it prominent? And
it's a challenge. Same thing is true with engineers. Engineers come and go, and a certain knowledgeable engineer may leave, and that person or scientist have significant knowledge. The one thing that has worked well, in my experience, is that we have developed what we call a design review checklist. So let's say I'm designing something that has a fiber optic. There's an Excel tab, and on the Excel tab it says, okay, have you considered the radius of this? The things that have failed, and things have we call it written with blood, right? All those lessons learned are captured in this Excel spreadsheet called design review checklist. Now, it's effective to a point that people have to be willing to put meaningful stuff in there. So it really comes down to management and the motivation of the individual, right? So part of it is the engineering, and so part of it the management team to truly manage, reward these people to actually put this stuff in there, because it can be super useful. You can save significant amount of time if you don't repeat a mistake that was already made 2 years ago, right? So it's still challenging to get people to do it, but we have, I would say, somewhat successful using a design review checklist, but it's a challenge.
So Kayvan, you were involved from the very beginning of the development of the idea to the end product developed.
Yes.
In this company, so that's what whole process. So every process requires like process control, statistical process control, respect to the manufacturing.
Yes.
So I was wondering, at which stage you design that process control, the statistical process? Is it in the design stage, or when the product is developed and you start?
No, it has to be, you have to write in the design stage. When you're doing your design outputs, right, you have the quality team concurrent with you. Let's say you're designing something, you're assembling something that requires a certain dimension. You do it by design, but you have to verify it, right? You have to verify it in production, so they may put it like a laser system and stuff, but they have to plan for it right then, because when you go to part of your design output is going to be that, all the equipment and stuff should be ready too. So everything should be ready and do the design stage. Can't wait to uncover something later on. It's from the beginning, from the very beginning, you got to start thinking about concurrent. Now, in practice, that usually happens in a design output phase. They don't usually get involved in the, like the user needs stuff as they should, but they don't. But no, it should be concurrent. That should be really envisioned right up front.
I have a question, just out of curiosity, because, well, I used to know someone in the surgical field, so what kind of acceptance rate do you have with new product and education with people who have used, you know, a tool and it might work quite differently in the field? Do you go out and have education, I would assume, for these different tools? And you change that education based on the actual user's feedback with the tools that you provide them?
So you're talking about having training in the field?
Yeah, the actual people using the machines, you know, you're in surgery, the machine stops working, and this is the exact example that I've heard, the machine stops working, they don't want to call IT, they want to know, they want to use the machine they knew how to fix themselves. So I'm curious if that's come up in your development and how you handle it.
One particular device where, so every medical device company have people called reps still represented in the field, right? And a lot of them are actually, believe it or not, sometimes they're actually in the operating room with the surgeons, right? And those reps are trained and they're trained to how to use the device. And if there are issues that we know that could potentially cause, to make these more efficient, those reps are trained to train the physicians on the spot. The challenge with that has been that as your device becomes more and more successful, you're now selling it throughout the country and throughout the globe. Are you going to have a rep for every particular procedure or not? There's a line you're going to draw that. How practical is this? Due to the level of training required. But it is training on site. It is done.
Other questions? Anybody on time? Okay, thank you very much.